Hello, this is Joe Folkman, and today we're going to have a webinar about developing yourself as a leader. Now, last month's webinar, we talked about the importance of giving feedback and gave some good suggestions about how you can improve your ability to give it. Today, we're going to talk about receiving it and you receiving it personally and developing yourself as a leader. I want to start by really talking about this issue. Do leaders make a difference? Do they have an impact? We keep doing studies on this. You've seen 1 million of them. We're going to show you 1,000,001 here. We just did a new study in Mexico, and what we were studying was a retail store that focused on the poorest people in that country. And they build a business that is very profitable and really helping poor people get financing and be able to buy things that they needed. We did the study where we looked at the effectiveness, the leader effectiveness of the store managers. And then we looked at store-to-store sales growth, the percentage growth versus the prior year. And we found this wonderful curve that showed us that, again, if the leader was poor, they had a very small sales growth. But if the leader was highly effective, they had a 7.4% increase in growth. And we also then looked at that same data and we looked at the turnover. Again, what we found was consistent with what we found before, that poor leaders had about 81% turnover, but the best leaders had only about 68%. Now, that's still pretty high, but what's problem with turnover is you're losing your best talent. And again, that difference in the talent that you keep, we think makes a difference in the stores. Over the years, we've collected more and more data. And this next study shows us a study of 40,000 leaders across the globe with 3 or more direct reports. And what it looks at is the effectiveness of a leader and the level of employee engagement and satisfaction. Again, what we find is the number one factor affecting the engagement of employees is who's your boss. If we know who your boss is, we can pretty much predict your engagement. Poor leaders create dissatisfaction. Good leaders create adequate levels of satisfaction, but great leaders make a great difference. Now, all of this was really meant to kind of inspire you to say, can I be a better leader? Can I improve myself as a leader? And most people, they say to themselves, I am a good leader. Well, good's better than bad, but it isn't great. And so our challenge to you is, can you be a great leader? And today we have some ideas about how you can develop yourself as a leader. Now, when we look at our data, and several years ago, 10 years ago, we did this research and tried to find out which competencies really differentiated great leaders from poor leaders. What I'm showing you now is the results of 257,000 assessments of direct reports, ratings on these 16 differentiating competencies. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is, who knows you best? Your boss doesn't know you best. I mean, I think your direct reports really know you. Your boss knows who you'd like to, that person, you kind of put on the airs for your boss. But your direct reports, they know the real you. What's interesting on this study is you look at all the competencies and which ones were rated most positively, most negatively. The least positive competency that direct reports noticed was this competency of practicing self-development. Now, this switches off between inspires and motivates and practicing self-development. But I wanted to show you the 3 items that we ask that make up that competency. Now, item 15 creates an atmosphere of continual improvement in which self and others push to exceed expected results. Makes a real effort. Item 13 makes a real effort to improve based on feedback from others. And item 14 actively looks for opportunities to get feedback to improve him or herself. This competency is all about your willingness to improve yourself, to find ways to improve yourself, to ask for feedback, and then act on that feedback. And as direct reports rated it, this is the number 16. It's the least positive trait that you have. So we've done some studies, and we looked at leaders who were open to feedback, who ask for feedback, and who made a habit of asking for feedback. And we rated their effectiveness on it from the worst, bottom 10%, to the best, top 10%. And then we looked at leadership effectiveness. Guess what? Leaders who were terrible at asking for feedback, their average effectiveness rating, 15th percentile. Leaders who were great, 86th percentile. This one quality has an enormous effect on a leader's ability to be more effective. When we looked at that data and we look at it across age, what we find is at a young age, we're very open to asking for feedback. In fact, we're hungry for feedback. We need feedback. But as people get older, they tend to sort of slow down. And boy, by the time you're 61, you're just like, well, I don't need this at all. Isn't that interesting? As we get older, we tend to stop asking for feedback. I guess we think we know it all. When we look at the difference between males and females, you can see the line there for males. It's sort of a ever dropping curve. But for females, it follows the males until about age 40, and then it levels off. And there's a significant difference between females and their willingness to ask for feedback and males. And I just, if you want the validation of this, just ask the question, who's more willing to ask for directions, males or females? And of course, you've probably had that experience that females, for some reason, will ask for direction. I don't know why, because you can always figure it out eventually. And then if we look at this whole asking for feedback over position, you can see that supervisors are much more likely to ask for feedback than top management. We've shown you all the data, so let's do an online poll here and see what you think. Why does the habit of asking for feedback decline over age and position? Well, one possibility is that people become completely competent. They are so competent, they don't need feedback. The second possibility is there's nothing new, no changes. It's business as usual. In other words, you don't need feedback because everything's the same. And number three, many people assume that they didn't need feedback, but they actually do. Well, weigh in. Which option do you think? Is it a 1, 2, or 3? And I see the votes coming in. Well, it's kind of a sucker question. I mean, yeah, we all know that people aren't completely competent, and our businesses change every day. And really, it's that assumption that people make that, gee, they've learned, they've gone to school, when they're young, they need that feedback, but when they're older, they don't. And I believe that's wrong, and I think maybe you'll agree with me that that's wrong. We looked at people who were ineffective at asking for feedback and those that were highly effective. And we looked at this over positions. What we found is that there were some supervisors that were great at asking for feedback, some middle managers that were great, and some senior managers and top managers were great. In other words, some people retained the habit of asking for feedback while others did not. So it isn't position that really, there's a tendency for more people in a higher position to not ask. But we think that everybody can do this, and we know that you can do it too. So how could you improve your ability to practice self-development? And we'd like to encourage you to do that. And if you think about that idea of practicing self-development, we talk about this linear and nonlinear approach. And the linear approach is just sort of this straightforward way. And so if you think about this in a linear sense, how to practice self-development, when we ask people, well, let's say you wanted to practice self-development, what would you do? And some people say, well, I'd go around and ask people why I'm such a loser. Or I'd put a sign on my back, said, give me some feedback. Or maybe I'd start a club, a feedback is fun club. Well, I don't think that's going to work. And so we looked at people who were very effective at self-development, and we started to ask the question of what they did and how they improved their ability to ask for and look at feedback. And we got a database of 286,000 people, and we focused on 20,000 leaders. And we found some specific skills that really improved your ability to practice self-development and to improve yourself. And there's 8 of these companion behaviors. Now, today in this webinar, there's some webinars you just sit back and listen and sort of, you got to soak in the information. What I'd like to encourage you to do today is to think about this for yourself and really stay on task and ask yourself, which one of these 8 companion behaviors would really help me to improve my ability to practice self-development myself? And the goal is for you to focus on 1 or 2 of these. And what our research tends to say is that this is going to help you to be a better leader. Now, what we're showing you here is research that's directly from our extraordinary leader development process. We have a process that helps people to build strengths. And so we know there's a better way than just asking. These nonlinear behaviors really give you the specifics of what it takes to build a strength. We're going to talk about each one of these 8 as we do identify which one of these would work best for you. The first companion behavior is listening, and listening for understanding. So if you ask any group of leaders what's important or how can they be better listeners, what I've found is they know what to do. I mean, they come up with things like listen more attentively, seek information to clarify, paraphrase or confirm understanding, ask thought-provoking questions that prompt self-discovery, listen beyond words for the feelings and implied meaning, and translate understanding into action. They'll always come up with this list. And so my experience is, and I just did this with a large group and had people divide up into groups, they knew all the ways that they could be better listeners. And my guess is you know how to be a better listener, but we really don't do it well. We know how to do it, but we tend not to do it, and we're not very effective at it. We've researched this, and we found out there were 5 bad habits. This is terrible listeners, but I just think bad listeners. I mean, you don't need to be terrible. But sometimes people are listening, but others don't recognize it. So what are the bad habits? Number 1 is others perceive us as we're in a hurry. We don't have enough time. Now, what's fascinating to me is that when you put somebody off and you don't listen to them, you're going to end up paying for that in more time later on. And just having the habit of slowing down and giving people not a lot of time, just a few minutes, but listening to them intently can really help. And so quit, help people see that you're not in a big hurry. The second thing is sometimes we become defensive. People are trying to express their point of view, and rather than listening to it, we're defending our point of view, we're reacting, and we're not really listening. And so don't be defensive. Number 3, we're unwilling to give the time and make an effort to help others. This is such a wonderful skill, and it buys you so much in terms of commitment to employees. That when you will help others and make a little effort to help others. And most people are willing, but the perception is you're not. And that's the frustrating thing for a lot of people, is that people think you aren't willing when you are. The fourth one is we resist change based on feedback from others. And so they think if they give us feedback, we're not going to do anything with it. So be open to change. And the fifth one is we never ask others for feedback about our performance. We found that people that are better at asking actually are more effective at giving feedback. And so those are the 5 bad habits. And if those fit one of you, I think changing one of those would help you be a better listener. We did some research where we looked at the effectiveness that leaders have in terms of listening. So we asked the question, most of the time my manager carefully listens to my point of view about problems before giving feedback. And again, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then we looked at the extent to which you felt my manager provides me with honest, straightforward feedback. And these are percentile scores, but you see the trend there. That is profound. So if people don't think you're listening, they don't really think you listen to feedback and you give honest, straightforward feedback. We also looked at the extent to which people were more open to receiving, or their preference for receiving redirecting feedback or negative feedback. And again, you see that same item. Most of the time, my manager carefully listens, and you can see those percentile scores go up, that when you carefully listen, people are really more open to receiving negative feedback. Listening is the number one companion behavior in terms of helping you to practice self-development. The second one is the extent to which you're open to ideas of others. Now, you might have heard of this fictional character, or this fictional thing called the abominable snowman. And a lot of people, they debate whether this thing actually exists or not. But we've seen something similar to this in organizations, and they've been spotted a lot. It's not the abominable snowman, it's the abominable no man or woman. And that's the person that when you go to them and say, I have a good idea, they're no, we don't need any more ideas. And they're not open to ideas. Now, when you ask others for feedback, it's possible, it's just possible, you may hear something with which you disagree. And there's 2 possible explanations for that. You're right, or they're right. We did an interesting little study where we looked at your ability as a leader to select the competencies that you felt were most important. And then we compared your selections to the selections of others. Now, we did this over thousands of cases. But what we found is that 79.6% of the time, people only got half of things right. And actually, it varies. Some 7.7% didn't get any, 30% got 1, and 41.8% got 2. Only 1.6% were spot on, 4 out of 4. Now, this is kind of a hard exercise, and it's hard to do, but I use that as an example, and we've looked at this over time in so many different situations, and we found that so often the only person that's confused about what's really going on in terms of feedback is you yourself. Others are really pretty clear, and they're consistent in terms of their feedback. So my advice would be, listen to others. Most of the time, they're right. An example of that came a few years ago when I was working with a client, and they did a 360 assessment with all their leaders, but they also did an employee engagement survey. And it took a great deal of effort to do both assessments. Well, the client came to me and they said, we want to combine both assessments. We want to merge them together. And being a good consultant, I told them that was a really bad idea. Well, the response back from the client was, we don't care. We're going to do it anyway. So they went ahead and did it. And I did it kind of begrudgingly. What was interesting about it is that because we did this, we discovered the connection between employee engagement and leadership effectiveness. I showed you the chart at the beginning of this webinar. And with that discovery, that really changed the way we did 360 assessments from then on. We always added a short employee engagement index to every 360. That came from listening to others. So most of the good things that I've discovered in life have come from listening to feedback. I encourage you to listen and be open to the feedback from others. The third thing that you can do to improve your ability to practice self-development is to respect others. Now, sometimes people don't feel like they're respected. And there are 5 ways that we fail to show respect. Number 1 is we fail to balance getting results for consideration for others. When people have something coming up in their schedule, to the extent that we sort of encourage people to get their job done and ignore their personal circumstances, that shows disrespect. The second thing we do is, or we need to do, is to make it safe for others to speak up. Don't shoot the messenger. The third thing, create a climate where others feel trusted. And what's the level of trust from your direct reports? Do they really trust you? Number 4, be aware of how your behaviors impact others. And you've got to look really closely to understand that. And number 5, in high pressure situations, respond positively. When the pressure's on, that's when we really see the true you. And you've got to show at that point how to respond positively. The number 4 way for you to increase your ability to practice self-development is honesty and integrity. There was an interesting article in the last little while about from the Rolling Stone magazine that accused a university and a fraternity on the university of raping this woman. And there was a lot of news coverage on that, and it came out in several different magazines and newspapers. And over a period of time, it turned out that all these stories were false. One commentator described the problem as something they called cognitive bias. What cognitive bias is that if we believe something is true, what we tend to do when we look at the evidence is focus our attention on the stuff that agrees with our point of view and ignore things that disagree, right? In other words, we tend to focus on facts that build up our bias. Being honest, and this is really a great thing to think about, but I think one of the things we're saying is you need to be honest with yourself. And that's probably one of the toughest things to do. We found if you ask people to describe events of their past and then anticipate future events, when they talk about the past, they'll talk about a mix of both positive and negative experiences. But when they talk about the future, they tend to just describe it as positive. And that's what we think people have, a positive bias. When you think about that, rather than look for only the positive aspects of your performance, look for both the good and the bad. And unless prompted, assume that people will tend to share only the positive. I was in church a few weeks ago. Somebody gave a really boring talk. And after the talk, I was walking down the hall and I saw them coming the other way, and I passed him, and these words came out of my mouth: "Great talk." Oh, what a liar I am. It wasn't a great talk. It was boring as heck, but I'm not going to say that. And people don't say that. If you hear people patting you on the back and saying, what a great, da, 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 I don't know. I don't think I would trust it. One of the habits that I think you've got to develop is to ask others the question, thank you so much for that feedback, but what could I have done to substantially improve my performance even more? Or what could I have done in that meeting to move it from a good meeting to a great meeting? So if you ask those kind of specific questions and you really encourage people to give you that constructive feedback, they will. And without that, they're going to tell you, what you think you want to hear. The next way to improve self-development is to inspire and motivate. And usually we're talking about how to inspire and motivate others. In this case, it's how to inspire and motivate you. And again, we look back at the data that we received and we see that the number 16 competency is practicing self-development. The number 15 is inspires and motivates others. So it's not a competency that we're really good at. Now, there's a couple of ideas that we have about how to inspire and motivate yourself. The first one is about clear vision and direction. Several months ago, I met a woman named Sarah. And Sarah told me about this experience that she was working one night about 9 o'clock. And she was home, she was working at home, and her husband was over watching TV, and she is just slaving away. She's working she's working really hard, and her husband's friend comes over, and they're talking, they're goofing around in the other room, and Sarah's working away, and she's just totally focused 100%. And then the friend of her husband comes up to Sarah and says, Sarah, it's 9 o'clock at night. What are you doing? And she looks up at him and says, I'm trying to cure cancer. Well, she was in a business where they were curing cancer. Now, what's fascinating about it is she wasn't a biologist or a geneticist or a chemist. She's an HR person, right? And what she was doing was she was working on a meeting. Now, but she connected what she was doing to that vision of I'm trying to cure cancer. And that's the power of a great vision. It's interesting when you think about what happens in your life. When I was a graduate student, we studied new mothers, and many of the women here have had newborn babies, and they know how overwhelmed they were at having a newborn baby. And what we found when we studied women with newborn babies is that just the pace of that and the difficulty of that, one of the things that happened was that they quit planning. Whenever they planned something, the baby was sick or whatever, it ended up being canceled. And so what we found is that in that period of time, women were so overwhelmed, they quit planning. As you look at the pace of work and in our lives, it keeps increasing. We're doing more and more, and we're experiencing more constant and continual change. And I think for a lot of us, we get in this reactive mode where we stop visualizing, we stop thinking about the future. We just try to make it through the day. We just try to keep our heads above water. And that certainly isn't a vision for your future. So one of the things I'd like to encourage you to do is create a vision for yourself about the leader you'd like to be, and take some time to think about that and have a clear vision of what you'd like to be as a leader. The second way that you can inspire and motivate others is by establishing stretch goals. Now, what we know about stretch goals is that when you accomplish a really difficult task, it has a positive impact on your satisfaction with work. When you accomplish something that's difficult, you feel better about yourself. But many of us resist setting stretch goals because we feel so overwhelmed by our workload and our responsibilities. We found that identifying one issue for improvement can have a significant positive impact on a leader's effectiveness. Now, let me show you some data. We looked at leaders with fatal flaws, and in our pretest data, they came in at the 20th percentile. They were among the worst leaders we'd ever met. But 18 months later, they improved one issue and they shot up to the 51st percentile. They made a 31 percentile point gain. And this is with 120 leaders. And then we looked at people that were building strengths, and this was with 281 leaders. And we found, again, in our initial data, they were at the 60th percentile, but focusing on one issue, just one thing, they moved to the 82nd percentile. We are optimistic that if you can set a stretch goal to work on one leadership quality, it can have a substantial effect on how you're perceived as a leader, just one thing. And I know you can't do 15, 16, or 18, but you can do one. And find a way to set a stretch goal to improve one thing in your life. Number 6 way to improve your ability to practice self-development is get effective feedback and development. We found there was a really good correlation between your ability to ask for feedback and your ability to give feedback to others. In other words, people that were the best at asking for feedback themselves tended to be rated much better in their ability to give feedback to others. Now, many of us, in terms of giving feedback, have experienced something I call a feedback ambush. You're walking down the hall someday, your boss comes out of his office and says, "I need to talk to you now." What goes through your mind? What do you think of first? And it's sort of that fight, flight, or freeze. I mean, it's those initial reactions where our brain kind of takes over, and we don't do a lot with that. And that feedback ambush, it never works, and it's always difficult. And feedback's a little bit like getting a shot in the arm. I mean, it's something that's going to help you, but it really hurts. So it can accomplish a lot of good, but it can possibly do some harm as well. And one of the things I've come to believe is if you would think about how you'd like to receive feedback from someone who delivered some tough feedback to you, what would you like that person to do? Here's my guess. Rather than the person just telling you what you did wrong, I'll bet you'd probably like to talk first and explain the situation before they sort of told you their point of view. You'd probably prefer that the other person listen carefully and ask clarifying questions so that they really understood. You know, rather than the other person telling you what you needed to change, you'd probably prefer that they ask you, well, what do you think would help? Or how would you change this situation? So you'd make the recommendation first. And you'd probably like it if that person offered to help or offered their support in the process. I think if you do that, you'll find that feedback works a lot better. The interesting thing is most people believe when they're giving feedback, this person doesn't understand or they don't know what's wrong, they don't see the problem. We asked over 3,000 people the question of, was feedback a surprise to them? And only 12% said it was. The vast majority know the problem. And so just keep that in mind, that people can recognize the problem. Number 7 way of practice self-development is by taking initiative. I love the analogy of the rocket. It takes the majority of fuel just to get 2 feet off the ground. And in terms of asking for feedback, It takes a lot of fuel just to take the initiative, to get started, to ask for feedback, it's a little, takes some courage and some initiative to try to do that. We studied this whole issue of initiative, and we were interested to find that females were much better at taking initiative than males. And I thought about this for a long time. And recently, my wife, she talked to me and she said, we've been married for over 30 years. And I don't think in 30 years you've once changed the toilet paper roll. Now, I know I've done that at least once, maybe twice, several times. So as you think about that, I thought, well, she just doesn't see me doing it. So I started to, when I did change the toilet paper roll, I started to sign it. Artists sign their great work just so she'd notice it. So, now I'm really improving on that. Anyway, we think it'd be great if you took more initiative. The last one of the 8 is this willingness to take risks. John F. Kennedy said, there are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. And a lot of times, asking for feedback is a bit of a risk, and asking how you're doing to others feels like a bit of a risk. But as you think about your career, when you get a new job and you think about these 2 dimensions, competence and passion, usually when you start a new job, you have a lot of passion, but not so much competence, and you're kind of a novice at that. But over time, you develop competence. And once you get a lot of competence, you gain experience. And then when you get enough experience, you have something we call an extraordinary moment. You do something at work that you just love. It's great. You've enjoyed it. And it's marvelous. And your job satisfaction is high and life satisfaction is high. And so because you're so good at this thing, people keep having you do this same thing over and over. And year 1, your job's pretty good. And year 2, your job's okay. And year 3, it's all right. And year 4, over time, what you find is your passion reduces a bit. And things that you once loved doing, you kind of find yourself, it's harder to do it. And when you stay there too long, this becomes a huge chore. And when work's a chore, what happens is your competence reduces. Now, you don't mean to, but you just become, you're not on the edge, you're not focusing anymore. And if you do this for a long time, the world passes you by, and you move into a place we call day prison. And you go to work in the morning, and the bars come on. What does it feel like to be in day prison? Well, job satisfaction is low, life satisfaction low. Life is not good in day prison. What's interesting for a lot of people is they think about this cycle, and we ask them, what got you into day prison? Well, they learned to do something really well. They hung on and hung on and hung on. They didn't take that risk. They didn't try to ask for that opportunity or do something new. So when you're coming off that extraordinary moment, ask for, look for some other opportunities. Or when you're in that chore mode, start to look for other opportunities. And there ought to be these rumble strips as you cross that bar between extraordinary moments and chore that remind you, hey, you need to watch out. There's danger ahead. So these are the 8 companion behaviors. Think about the 8. Are there a couple that would help you to improve as a leader? Is it listening, being open to the ideas of others, respect others, honesty and integrity inspires and motivates, effective feedback, taking initiative, or willingness to take risks? Now, we'd like you to choose a couple. what we'd like to do is we'd like to offer you some follow-up to help you in the process of creating a development plan. Now, what we're going to send you is actually a section of our Competency Companion Development Guide. It's what we use to help leaders build profound strengths. And you'll be able to see exactly what we use for those materials. And so it'll give you an idea of what we do when we do our extraordinary leader training and when people get our 360 feedback, the kind of tools that help them to develop. So after this webinar, you're going to, there's a survey that comes up. Fill out the survey. And what we're going to do is we're going to send you this guide, and it goes through all 8 of the companion behaviors and provides 3 developmental suggestions that come out of research that we found to be the best suggestions of how you can implement a change on a particular behavior. This helps you to create a real specific plan for improvement. And we found that the starting point for really changing one of these things is creating a good plan. So good luck on this. Remember, feedback is a gift, and people have a lot of gifts just waiting for you if you'll ask. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon.